Here we are for the latest podcast of Synergization. I'm joined by my two co-hosts, Lucas Urgenti and Anthony Sino. How's it going, gentlemen?
How's it going? Hey Pat, hey Lucas. Everything's going well here. Just again, nothing new really, especially with hockey season not around. It's really weird not having hockey, basically in the October-November turn, and so I'm just turning to other sports, football, Champions League, and just now that Halloween's done, got to get into that holiday season spirit now.
Yeah, it's Christmas time now. November 1st,
It's
Christmas time.
Christmas. It's crazy. Crazy.
Basically, Costco and Walmart, I already saw some sponsored ads of like Christmas stuff. It's like they're just waiting for that calendar to turn.
Yeah. It's definitely the time of the year,
Yeah, but we do have some hockey news to talk about, which is good.
We do. So last week, Craig Button released his top 7 Canadian teams as we head into next season. I'll read out the list, gentlemen, and we'll kind of, provide our thoughts and kind of our own list. So as of Craig Button's list, he mentioned the Ottawa Senators would be the 7th best Canadian team, the Edmonton Oilers as the 6th best, slightly outdone by the Vancouver Canucks. Then the Maple Leafs, then the Winnipeg Jets, Calgary Flames, and number 1 Canadian team is the Montreal Canadiens. Much has been spoken about this, and a lot of it, his opinion, based on his audio and some of the other stuff that I've written, was really based on their performance against the Pittsburgh Penguins in the bubble. But I find that recency bias really causes a lot of people to kind of let go of objectivity. But I would like to get your gentlemen's just high-level thoughts first, and then we'll go into our individual lists after.
Yeah, so I would say the first things first to keep in mind when TSN or Sportsnet when they make these lists is it's to garner attention, right? Like we talk about all the time with what mainstream media is doing is they're trying to throw a bone or the proverbial bone into the pile of dogs and then just watch them fight over it basically. And in this case, we're the dogs, and we talk about it, and we get upset about it, and we get riled up about it, especially in Toronto when Craig comes out and says that Montreal is the best Canadian team. I disagree with it, especially like I we'll get into to our individual rankings later on in the podcast, but I really think that the only thing that I can agree with is that the Ottawa Senators are 7th. That would be the closest for me. How about you, Luke? What do you think?
Yeah, obviously, the list was rather interesting. It's probably nowhere close to what I would have had, what I think a few people would have had. I think, Anthony, you're right in the sense where, he's just going to kind of throw a take out there just to stir the pot and, get people's attention. But there comes a point where it kind of becomes like silly, I guess. And I don't want to dismiss his opinion. Obviously, he's well renowned and, he knows what he's talking about, however crazy his takes are. But I don't get the Montreal Canadiens at 1. I understand that, they went relatively far, and I put them in air quotations, in the bubble. I guess in their eyes, it was a successful postseason. They won a round. It is what it is. But I guess you also have to look at who they actually beat. And I don't think the Pittsburgh Penguins are, the Pittsburgh Penguins who won the Cup 2 years ago by any means. 3 years ago? 2 years ago?
3 years ago. 2017.
2017
was the last year they won.
Right.
They won
I think
back
it's a completely different roster. I just think that was just such a far-fetched analysis. And again, we're going to talk about it when we, talk about our actual rankings and what we think. But I don't know. You read these things, and you look at Mike Johnson's list, and it looks a lot more accurate. And you're like, okay, so they're not going to have the same list. That's not the greatest idea when you're trying to. I don't want to say cause controversy, but have a debate at the very least. You're not going to shoot out 2 of the exact same list and try and argue that because you can't. So I don't know. I mean, it is what it is. There's going to be some people who don't like it, some people who do like it. I just think if he was able to list legitimate points as to why he thinks the Canadians are ahead of the Flames and the Leafs more specifically, I think it would be a little bit more palatable, and it's something that you can kind of understand. But his reasonings were just funny. They were just funny to me.
Well, it's they're the hot team, right? Like Montreal goes out and they sign
recency bias.
It's a recency bias.
But by hot, I mean like they made acquisitions that how do I say this? Like that old school media pundits right? Like they go out and make a trade 5th round pick for the rights to Joel Edmondson, and they go sign him for like 4 years, I believe it was. They go sign they trade Max Domi for Josh Anderson, who at one point, I think maybe 2 years ago, had a fantastic season. People were crowning him the heir apparent to Tom Wilson, right? And then last year, I believe he had 1 goal in the NHL, played like 26 games. He had 4 points, and it was a disaster for him, right? So they get him for 7 years at 5.5 or 5.5 AAV. They go out and sign Toffoli 4.25 for 4 years, right? So they make all these moves, and then now a guy like Button says, "Wow, they used up that cap space that everyone was wondering when they were going to use it." And now they take on they're coming off a 5-game series win against the Penguins, and they took Philly to 6 games, right? So it's recency bias, but at the same time, you could very well make the argument that they didn't get Philly's best at all in that series, and that series probably should have ended a lot quicker if it wasn't for Carey Price. Now I get it, like the goalie is part of the team, so you can't discount that, right? I do think that Carey Price is the 2nd best goalie in Canada, maybe the 3rd, behind Connor Hellebuck and Jacob Markstrom, I would say. So like they definitely have some good goaltending, and the acquisition of Jake Allen should lessen the load of Carey Price in what we expect to be like a very condensed schedule, right? With the seeing that the league is going to probably start in early 2021, so they're going to have to squeeze in a decent amount of games in a very short little time, right? They want to end this 2021 season by the Summer Olympics in July, so I don't think we're going to be getting summer hockey like we saw this past summer. So I think a team like Montreal gets a guy like Jake Allen as well to help lessen the load off their star goalie. So it's just very interesting, to say the least. But yeah, I'd like to hear your guys' opinions on what you also think of Montreal. But so we want to get into the rankings. I don't know, Pat.
So I guess before we even go into the rankings, I want to make one final comment. And this observation actually came to me last week. I look at the 2 major sports media conglomerates, one being Bell, one being Rogers. Each are part owners of the Leafs, and I'm almost wondering if the content that we're getting is to not appear as being homers and expressing homerism. So there's just an extra level of critique that is being done on the Leafs, whereas the other teams will get more likely to get the benefit of the doubt. And as much as I liked what Montreal did in the summer, I think they did a great job. I thought they drafted well. I like a lot of their pickups. But there's still a team that's lacking a number 1 center, a true number 1 center. They're still dependent on an aging, defenseman and Weber on the back end. And Carey Price, you just never know. Like his injury history and all we ever hear about is the Leafs and their injury history and all this other stuff. But Carey Price, his groin in a condensed season will really be tested. We know that he's had issues with it in the past. We know that's taken him out of multiple games and for good chunks of seasons in the past. So, as much as they sound like they've done a lot, I'm still looking at the goaltending. Like you said, Anthony, I think that's going to be a critical point for them because they didn't score a lot of goals last year. So they better be able to defend it and they better be able to stop them. Because if not, it's not going to be a fun season for them.
Absolutely, right? Like this is how I see Montreal, and and you guys know me, right? Like I'm not 100% invested in the analytics in terms of like making that be the 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 brain, I would say, of all hockey takes or just basically I don't think that analytics tells all the story because there has to be some type of the proverbial eye test that has to
Yeah.
be taken into play here. But Montreal, by all accounts, from an analytics perspective, they dominate in terms of shooting metrics, basically, right? So they're Corsi for, right? They have their expected goals percentage. They rank very highly in those areas, and I think kind of merging the eye test and the analytics together, someone might say, wow, like look at Montreal, like they're just bound to break out. They always finish up high in the league in expected goals, Corsi for percentage, all these things, but they're just not scoring, right? So statistically, people say, well, the numbers will catch up, right? We hear this term a lot, regression to the mean.
Yeah.
But what people aren't considering is that they lack the star power to finish these high quality chances that or this high volume of chances that they're getting, right? So it doesn't matter how good you are at getting shots on net and keeping shots away from your net. You have to be able to finish your chances, and that's what Montreal's Achilles heel has been for a very long time now. Like I actually can't even remember. Like I would get. I think it's Saku Koivu. Like when's the last time like a star centerman has played for the Montreal Canadiens? My brain might be not remembering, but it to me it goes that far back, and Montreal has gone a long time with trying to lure these free agents. We know they tried to pursue Tavares, and Leafs fans like to dunk on them, dunk on Habs fans for not even getting a meeting with them. We know that they were interested in Duchesne, right? They tried to make Alex Galchenyuk a center, didn't work. Tried to make Max Domi a center, worked last year, didn't work this year. So you know what? Like I th- I know we kind of spent all this time now just delving into Montreal. I know we said we save those for later, but like to me, I still think they need to see more of a step from a guy like Nick Suzuki, and he needs to become that 70, 80, 85 point player basically.
Yeah.
And if he can become to that, then I would say, wow, like, okay, there's their guy. That's the guy that can lead them. And they do have a deep prospect pool. I will give them that. They have drafted well for quite some time now. The only thing is that are the timelines going to match of these prospects that they've been acquiring and their older veterans of Weber and Price, who are signed to big money and still on term, and they want to win now. They just signed Jeff Petrie too, Brendan Gallagher. Like they do have a lot of young guys, but people forget how old their veteran core is. So
Yeah.
so it's going to be interesting how they maneuver basically what their game plan is. Like
Yep.
I'd assume they're in win now, but at the same time, like you're only going as far as Carey Price has taken you. So
Yeah.
how many years is he giving you left? You know what I
No,
mean?
no, that's true. So that kind of is a nice transition to our rankings. So Lucas, do you want to go first with your top 7?
Yeah, sure, I could do that. So I kind of found it ironic after reading the two lists, Mike Johnson and Craig Buttons, and just in terms of how different they were. But I guess when I was trying to make my list, I was actually looking at it, and I mean, I might be a little bit of a more harsh judge than some other people would be, but I think a lot of these teams can actually interchange in their position, obviously depending on which players take a step forward and which players actually show out this year. But if I had to rank it, and I think I'm most comfortable with this rankings. So from, I guess, technically worst to best, so 7th to first, I had Ottawa at 7. And I struggled with that one because I actually don't hate where the Senators are trending. And obviously, I guess this list would be technically, for next season. But I kind of like Ottawa. I like DJ Smith. I like the way they play in general. I like the the injection of youth into the lineup. They finally got a goalie. Not that Craig Anderson wasn't good; he was a good goalie, but I just hope that Matt Murray could be a little bit better. They made a couple of decent signings. It just looks like things are going to be okay in Ottawa. I don't think it's going to be as bad as last year. And I think if they can, buy in again, and it seems like they did last year under DJ Smith, they should be okay. So this is where I got a little stuck because I absolutely cannot stand the Winnipeg Jets roster, top to bottom. Don't like it whatsoever. And I was considering putting them last, and I think that might be considered a crazy hot take. But then when you actually look at it, I don't know if it's as crazy as it might seem at first. They have a lot of old guys on that roster. Sorry, on that forward roster, I should say at least. They're relying on Paul Stastny to be their second line center. I think that's what I've heard. That's the gist.
Yep.
I don't love that. I don't love that by any means. They can't lock down their number. I think he was number 2 line. He went second overall. They can't lock this guy down. They don't know if they even want him anymore. It just seems like it's a mess in Winnipeg right now. Other than Morrissey, they have a bunch of you can't tell me that the defensive pairings in Winnipeg is good. Dylan DeMello, I assume he's gonna be okay. But after that, I don't even know who some of these guys are. So you're looking at this okay, so they obviously don't have D. They might have one of the worst D pairing in Canada. So you're looking at this roster and you're like, how can they be ranked so high? Like they were trending downwards last year. And to me, I just think it's going to continue going that way. So I would have had the Winnipeg Jets at 6. This is also where it gets a little tricky. And this is where I'm talking about intertwining there. I had Vancouver at 5. But that also could be Edmonton at 5 and Vancouver switched. And the reason why I ended up going with Vancouver at 5 is purely the Connor McDavid factor. I think anytime you have a team that's Connor McDavid on it, you just have to give them the benefit of the doubt. I also don't love Vancouver. I don't like their roster. I like their top 3, obviously. But after that, it gets a little wonky for me. If JT Miller can perform the exact same way he performed last year, they should be okay. Other than that, I think losing Markstrom was actually massive. I know they brought in Holtby, but there was a reason why Washington didn't want to retain Holtby. Not that he's going to be any worse than he was last year, but I just think Markstrom was such a big part in why they did so well. If they don't get that goaltending again, it might be a little bit troublesome in Vancouver, which goes to show why I had Edmonton just ahead of them. I just like the roster a little bit better. Connor McDavid factor, honestly, as simple as that. I like what they did in the offseason. I don't think that the Tyson Barrie acquisition is gonna make them that much better, but on the third line, it's really not that bad. And if he comes in on power play 2, I assume that Darnell Nurse has power play 1 locked up. I think we'll be okay there too. And realistically, their goalie situation is a little weird in Edmonton as well, but they've made do thus far. I hope that Mikko Koskinen and Mike Smith could be the answer again. Which after that leaves us with 3 more teams. And I had the Montreal Canadiens go at. What would that be? That would be 4? That would be 3? At 3. I had the Montreal Canadiens. Contrary to what you guys think, I actually don't hate the way they're creating their roster. And I think Anthony touched on it. There's just no superstars that are willing to go to Montreal. So they have to kind of make do with the hand they're dealt. And I think the reason why they overpaid, and I'm going to put overpaid in quotations, again, he could well be worth the money. The reason why they overpaid Josh Anderson is because they legitimately had to keep him. Obviously, the Max Domi experiment didn't work out. So I can see why they wanted to bring in Josh Anderson, a new team, see what happens. Hopefully he brings some type of juice to that top 3. I assume he'd be on, maybe top 6. I do really like the acquisition of Tyler Toffoli. And I like their defense. I truthfully do like Montreal's defense a lot. They got big. They're tough as nails. And you're, like Anthony said, you're going to be relying on that 2-goalie system, which, again, I kind of like. I mean, Carey Price, yeah, he regressed, but he also plays a lot of hockey games. So I know Anthony mentioned this. If you're going to eliminate even a quarter of the games that he had to play, I can't see why Jake Allen can't step in there and win Montreal a bunch of games. I really like Suzuki. I'm not too big on Kotkaniemi, but if Suzuki takes a step, I think that's a very, very competitive roster. Well more competitive than last year, which is ironic because they beat the Pens. So imagine what this roster would do to the Pens. of last year. But yeah, I don't hate the Montreal Canadiens roster at all, which is why I would have them at 3. And then I had the Calgary Flames at 2. I also like the Flames roster. Their top 6 is good. It peters out a little bit after that, but I think their defense is also really strong. I know they brought in Chris Tanev a little late. He's 30. You know, he's kind of roundabout way exiting his prime. But when you have Giordano and Hanifin as your top 2, I think you'll be okay. Rasmus Anderson's a great NHL defenseman. He's only 24 years old. I think their top 4 at least are very, very, very good. And the biggest reason why I like Calgary so much is because they finally have a goalie in Jacob Markstrom. That was always their Achilles heel. Like, they legitimately could not win games because of their goaltending. And I think this just gives them that opportunity. And then obviously the Leafs. And I think the Leafs kind of speak for themselves. I don't think we need to really talk about Toronto as much. We all know their roster and, the skill that goes with it. And I think Toronto just genuinely improved in the offseason. And I find it ironic that, Greg Button didn't have them at number 1. But yeah, that would be my list.
Now to you, Anthony.
All right, so similar to Lucas, I got Ottawa at 7. And to reiterate what Lucas said, I think Ottawa is coming. Like, they are they're quietly maneuvering some cap space. And they're kind of freeing that up to hopefully, fingers crossed, hopefully for Ottawa Senators fans, that Eugene Melnyk is going to open up his bank book and start and pay these high-end prospects that they have acquired through the draft, through tremendous drafting, I might add,
really.
and keep this core together. Like, Ottawa to me is just they're a fantastic. They have a fantastic outlook in let's say 4 to 5 years, where you're going to be looking at this team and if they are able to keep these guys, right? This is assuming they're able to keep these guys. You could be very well looking at how we look at the Tampa Bay Lightning right now, right? Insanely homegrown talent, drafted well. If they can make some good trades, I believe they could do so. If Tim Stützle can reach that high-end potential that everyone has touted him as, or touted that he has, then like the sky is the limit for this team down the line. But like, if we're again, this list is based off the upcoming season, and I just think again Ottawa's going to struggle to keep goals off the sheet for them. I think the Matt Murray acquisition was okay to do because it was a cheap acquisition price, but I think, was it 6.25 for 4 or 5 years, guys? I think it was 4. And to me, that just is too much given Murray's recent resume. Ever since he won those 2 Stanley Cups with Pittsburgh, it's kind of been a downhill decline for him, which is very weird because there was, at one point, people were saying this is Canada's next goalie for all the Olympic teams and stuff like that. So, and now he's not even going to get a sniff. So that's just something to keep in mind. But again, like, Ottawa had one of the best AHL teams last season. They drafted, I'll say, decently well this year. They had a lot of picks. I didn't like the Sanderson pick at 5, but I did like the Stützle pick at 3. I personally like Lucas Raymond, who Detroit got. So I don't know. They could, either way, they got a lot of volume picks, and they're gonna hit on some of those dart throws. So you just, like, in terms of sheer volume of picks that they made, they are gonna get some high end and middle pack roster players from this 2020 draft. So again, right, like, the process is great for them right now. Ottawa is doing all the right things that a rebuilding team should do. It's just a matter of when they get to that point when it's time to keep these young kids around, and these young kids are going to want some money off of their ELCs. Brady Tkachuk's, I believe, can sign right now. Like, he could sign his extension right now. So like, are you gonna give that kid what he's worth, right? They gave Shabbat 8x8, so again, like that's that's a promising sign. But let's just for Ottawa's sake, they should be hoping to just keep developing this talent. Like they acquired all these players through the draft. Now it's time to develop them and make sure that they're able to play for your roster down the line. But nonetheless, I'll move on to number 6. And for me, it was a very tough debate between Vancouver and Winnipeg. So, guys, basically my process was I tried to rank the forward cores of all 7 teams, tried to rank the defensive cores of all 7 teams, tried to rank the goaltending of all 7 teams. For me, the I think that Winnipeg has the best goalie in Canada in Connor Hellebuck. But again, right? Like I didn't put that much stock into how I rank the goalies because goaltending is voodoo, right? Like we experienced it here in Toronto with Freddie Anderson, had 2 or 3 fantastic seasons in the regular season, and this year he was crap, right? So, and we do know that Connor Hellebuck has had experiences of being kind of like on again, off again, year by year. So, to me, just because of the fact that goaltending is kind of voodoo, had Winnipeg at 6. Um, just because it's this ranking is really depending on what they get for Patrick Laine. I do think they're gonna trade him. And you know what? Like it's just a shame because he's just. I don't see Winnipeg winning a trade that they make for Patrick Laine. They're giving up the best player in the deal, and you know that the team that trades for Laine is gonna get a motivated player, and you just know that he's gonna go and he's gonna rip home 50 for fun, right? Like he's that type of goal scorer. So like I personally don't like Laine's complete game. So if Winnipeg can get a top right-handed shooting defenseman to pair with Morrissey, kind of like how they had that pairing with Truba back when they went to the conference final, like then we can reevaluate at that time. But right now, I think the way that it stands, Winnipeg does have the 6th weakest roster for me. Then I'll move on to Vancouver. And to me, it's just it really is a shame because I think they have 2 of the most dynamic players in the country in Pedersen and Quinn Hughes, right? So like I think if you're ranking forwards in Canada, you got the 2 in Edmonton, you got Matthews, and you could put Pedersen beside like in the conversation behind with Marner or and like for those to round out that top 5, right? Like Pedersen is that good. And so that's kind of star power is what kind of gave Vancouver the edge for me to put them at 5 over Winnipeg. They got depleted for sure in terms of not being able to keep some players into Toffoli. They lost who else?
Tanev.
They lost Tanev. They lost Markstrom, right? So, but they got a good stopgap in Holtby to kind of create a pretty good tandem with Demko, right? I think that's what's lost. Get it here. People are saying that Vancouver lost their MVP goalie. Yeah, but like Demko is a highly touted prospect, guys. Like I think he's going to be just fine there, taking over number 1 duties in Vancouver. There's a reason why Vancouver let Markstrom go is because they knew that they had Demko. So, and they're going to have to expose Holtby in the expansion draft. They'll protect Demko, and Vancouver will just be they'll be just fine in that going forward. So the thing for me with Vancouver that they're going to struggle is that bottom 6 going to be able to repeat what they were able to do in the playoffs, right? They had guys like Tyler Moss step up. Antoine Roussel was a pest, and he was, like it or not, a factor in these playoffs when they beat the Blues. So there's going to be a lot of what ifs in that bottom 6. They get Nate Schmidt to pair with Quinn Hughes. I think that's one of the best pairings in the country. But at the same time, not a big fan of the Tyler Myers, Alexander Edler second pair. That's old and that's slow to me. So I think you'll have to be able to just, if you're a Vancouver fan, you're relying on Travis Green to get the most out of these guys another time around. And they did get some playoff experience, right, for those young guys. Like we as much as we want to say it, right? Elias Pettersson, Bo Horvat, Brock Besser, JT Miller, that core won around, and to bring it back to the Leafs for a second, our core hasn't yet. So there must be something there in Vancouver that might not be apparent to the naked eye. So I'm banking on that experience, at least carrying them to a playoff spot, I would say, this year, in a weaker Pacific Division. And that brings me to number 4. And I won't talk too much about it because we already went very in depth with this team, but it's Montreal for me. Look, a lot of depth. Their right side is very strong. I really love Nick Suzuki. I'm not really sold. I'm not really sold on Kotkaniemi, but at the same time, right? Like, I don't know what they're gonna do with Philip Deneau. I believe that he was asking for a trade, so we're not sure there. But look, until Montreal can get guys on their roster that are guaranteed to score 30 plus goals a year, then I just can't see him competing in an Atlantic Division that has just too much star power, right? So that's where I am at with Montreal. I like their new Russian defenseman that's coming in Alexander Romanov, but other than that, to me, like the defense just lacks puck moving ability, in my opinion. Like Weber and Petrie, they had good playoff stints, guys, but I'm not gonna put too much stake in the playoffs this past year. Like guys came in fresh. They didn't come off the grind of a season. They had 4 months to prepare for this, for that playoff, right? So I think it did benefit the more mature, slower skating players because they were fresh, right? They had time to mend injuries. So I just think that the younger and faster teams will benefit this year because it's going to be a very much more compact schedule. Depth will be a factor, but like I just don't know how a guy like Shea Weber can play the way he did in the bubble over the course of, like, let's say a 48 game season from February to June, right?
Yep.
Plus playoffs. So that's another thing for me. And then that brings me to number 3. 2 and 3 again, very tight. I'll go 3 Calgary because and this is very hard for me because Calgary's defense is core in total is the best in the country, by far, in my opinion. I don't think anybody can hold a candle to Calgary's defense core. Now I know Giordano's an older guy, so you're banking on him kind of staying at a decent pace. Like, he's 1 year removed from winning the Norris, so who knows? But like Lucas said, Rasmus Anderson is an absolute stud. And they also have another defenseman that they drafted, I believe, 3 years ago, and Yusuf Alamaki. He was injured all of last year, but the Flames are insanely high on this guy. And they bring in Jacob Markstrom to finally give him a 1A goalie, like a star goalie. So again, I'm not going to put too much stock in the way Markstrom's resume, let's say, just because I think in any given year, like, a goalie can get injured, a goalie can just have a bad save percentage, right? So we've seen the randomness of goaltending performance in the past. So for me, it's gonna leave Calgary at 3, and that gave Edmonton the edge at number 2. Now, funny enough, I think Edmonton's goalies are the worst. That their goaltending situation is the worst in the country, but I really like how their decor has developed. Like Darnell Nurse, Ethan Bear, that is a very, very solid first pair. Caleb Jones has developed well. Adam Larson, like it or not, is just a stable body back there that can play tough minutes for you, and he's kind of exactly what those younger Edmonton defensemen need. Now I think the X factor for Edmonton is Evan Bouchard. Their top. I think he was 10th overall, maybe in 2018. Don't quote me on that, but he was a high drafted prospect to out of London, and I think he's going to be a stud too, right? Like I think his skating needs to improve a lot, but he's a solid puck mover. He's big, he's rangy, and he's gonna play big minutes for Edmonton down the line. Hopefully, it's this year. They also have another guy in Philip Broberg who is playing for them in the bubble. He's going to play for Edmonton this year as well. So Edmonton just they've kept acquiring these pieces on defense that I think are going to play a really big role for them and hopefully alleviate some of the pressure off a Koskinen and a Mike Smith in net. And then again, guys, like the forward group speaks for itself. I don't even need to they have the. I'll say Matthews is better than Draisaitl, but that when McDavid and Draisaitl are on the ice together, there's no two players in the country that are more dangerous together. I would say. So I just think that Edmonton they're gonna be good again. I think they have a shot of finishing top 2 in a Pacific Division. Jesse Puljujarvi is coming back. He's rejuvenated, coming back from Finland. It's where he should have been right after he was drafted. Puljujarvi should never have been in North America after his draft year. So that's on the Oilers. But now that they've finally come to terms with him, I think that he will definitely be a much needed scoring threat in that top 6. Yamamoto has shown signs of top 6 ability. They still got Nugent Hopkins. Kyle Turris is a good acquisition for a bottom 6 center role. James Neal can give you secondary power play. And like it or not, guys, I forgot to mention when I was talking about the defense, but Tyson Barrie could very well be resurging in Edmonton if he's passing the puck to 97 and 29. So overall, I think Edmonton has improved for sure. And I just think that eventually, we see it, guys. These star players, eventually McDavid and Draisaitl are just going to drag this team somewhere. They just are. And I will not be betting against those two guys anytime soon. So that's where I'll have them at number 2. And that leaves me at number 1 with Toronto. I just think that Toronto is the best more well-rounded team in the country. They have a great mix of star players, some very good physical depth that add a different element to the top 6. And then you also have a goaltender who is playing for a contract next year, Freddie Anderson. And then you also have Jack Campbell that can alleviate that pressure off of Freddie Anderson. And hopefully Freddie won't have to play so many games next year in short order. So like we said, we talk about the Leafs every podcast, so I won't go too in depth in this team, but I just think that overall they find a perfect mix of improving the defense, improve their forward depth without spending too much money, and they now have some solid answers in the backup goalie position. So overall, that would be my ranking. Interested to hear your thoughts, Pat, on your ranking now.
Yeah, so I kind of went a little bit differently. For me, I've always been one. I really do believe in the rookie curse in the sophomore year. So I'm going to lead. Obviously, the consensus number 7 is Ottawa Senators, and that's not a critique for what they did. It's not a critique on the talent that's currently in their system. It's just an age factor. They have so much youth everywhere. But I've always liked DJ Smith. I've been a big proponent of DJ Smith. I followed him as the coach of the Oshawa Generals when, he took a team that, was, no one really thought could win a Memorial Cup. It took them right to, they beat Connor McDavid and the Barrie Colts. and they went on to win the Memorial Cup. So he is a coach that is very talented. He is a coach that players will play for, and that's what we saw last year from the Ottawa Senators. To beat them, you had to outwork them. You might have them beat talent-wise, but they were going to fight for every puck. They were going to fight in every corner. So I like where Ottawa's going, but at this point, I am going to leave them at number 7. My number 6, I'm going to be a little bit harder on the Canucks. I think that there's going to be a little bit of regression. And once again, I think it just speaks to age again. With the Vancouver, a lot of their key players are going into their second year. Last year with COVID, I think some players took a hit on their production. Others seem to have benefited from it. And I love the Cinderella story that the Vancouver Canucks were in this COVID playoffs. But I just see a little bit of regression with the loss of a Markstrom, losing Tanev on defense. And I like the addition of Nate Smith. I think he does fit and fill a hole, but I just don't see it over a course of a grinded out, abbreviated season. So I have Vancouver Canucks as my number 6. As my number 5, I have Winnipeg Jets for all the reasons that you guys mentioned. I'm looking at a defense that has 2 NHL-ready defensemen, and everyone else, I have no idea who they are. I also see a team that might be having some issues. Funny enough, we discussed this in our last podcast that the Leafs might be having issues in the dressing room. When I see a team that's willing to trade away a player that can score 50 goals, that speaks to something in that room. I'm not putting it on Line A. I don't know. I
think it does speak to the player, Pat. It does,
could,
because there's some strong leadership in that room.
There's definitely some strong leadership with Blake Wheeler, Mark Scheifele. So it might just be that individual player, but the fact that they were willing to bring back Paul Stastny to kind of get Laine going again potentially, it's just, I don't know how they can start a season when Laine back in that dressing room, given everything that we've heard, all the potential trades and all this stuff. So I'm going to be a little bit more harder on them because I don't know what they're going to look like. I don't. I think I like their goaltending, but when you're playing behind essentially 4 AHL defensemen, it's going to be a rough go, especially in the Western Conference. There's so much talent. There's just so much fight. So many teams making the next step. You see Vegas making a huge step. St. Louis is going to be up there. I personally like Edmonton. Like I said, you can't count a team that has the best player in the world on their team. I just don't see it with the Jets. After the Jets, I have the Montreal Canadiens. Once again, I like what they did this summer. I like the fact that they had to spend some additional cap dollars. I like where they drafted. I've been a huge Nick Suzuki fan. I like where his career is going. But I definitely think that when you can't score goals, and I said this right off the top of the podcast, when you struggle to score goals in the NHL, especially in the regular season, you're going to have more difficult nights than easy ones. So I'm going to be a little bit harder on the Montreal Canadiens. Then that leaves me with the Calgary Flames as my next team. Hopefully I didn't miss anyone because I'm getting kind of excited about this. So I had the Calgary Flames as my next team. I've always liked Calgary. I like Johnny Hockey. I like what they've done with their defense. Picking up Markstrom is a huge plus. And they're a veteran team. I think that there's a lot to be said about experience and losing and going through that. And, I definitely think at some point Calgary's going to break through. And in essentially a conference like the West, Calgary's definitely very, very much set up to succeed. And then I have Leafs as my number 1. For all the complaints and all the critiques and all the stuff we've heard by all the media pundits, the Leafs went out and rounded out every aspect of their roster. We asked them to add depth. We've added depth. Fans were complaining last week about a 4th-string goalie. That's where we're at in Toronto right now. When we're complaining about Michael Hutchinson falling in behind.
How do we let that news get through? How do we let?
You know what I mean? Like it's I don't know. And then you add the
insurance. That's
it is. It's just insurance.
I don't want to see him in a Leafs jersey ever again. But that's just an emotional scar.
But the also thing too is I think that Aaron Dell's going to have to clear waivers. That's a risk.
That was weird for me actually. Now that you mentioned that, I was kind of hoping that they got him on a two-way, but I guess I didn't even pay attention.
Yeah, I guess so. If for him to go down, I think it's based on isn't it based on experience? Or that's what makes him.
I think it is. They're gonna have to. So what I've read since the Hutchinson signing is they're gonna try and sneak Dell in down on waivers.
Yeah.
On a day where maybe a few other goalies are going in, or
yeah,
I'm not sure exactly of the particulars, but you need to try and sneak him in on a day that no
everyone else is looking elsewhere,
right? Because you would argue, like I went through it and I've read some tweets about this, is that Dell is probably the best third string goalie in the NHL. That's what people are saying. Like he's by far the most experienced third string goalie that any NHL team has. And he's signed to like a decent ticket.
Yeah, really good deal.
800,000, I believe. So the Leafs are gonna have it's gonna be probably Brandon Pridham, but they're gonna have to find a way to get him through. I hope they get him through. And the reason why is I just think that team has lost a lot of confidence in Michael Hutchinson, and like I said earlier, right? Emotional scars. So I think it's just a good insurance policy. Like it's tidy work by Dubas for sure.
Yep.
But yeah, you're right. At the end of the day, like how can
we're
up in arms over the fourth string goalie.
We're literally arguing over the fourth string goalie. So, and then that also takes me to the signing of Wayne Simmons and Joe Thornton, which I think from a flexibility perspective gives the Leafs a dynamic that they never had. So yes, they might be, and they probably are a little bit slower than last year, but weren't we as a market and as a city complaining that the Leafs had too many of the same player? So I like the fact that we've changed a little bit of the dynamic. I'm more than accepting that we're not getting Joe Thornton from 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. But I like what he brings. I like the fact that now the Leafs can essentially roll out 2 power plays and still be fairly lethal on the second one. Because I thought when you looked at the power plays last year, the Leafs were one-dimensional. If that first power play didn't score, teams weren't really defending the Leafs' second power play. Like, who was on it? Like, Hyman, probably the biggest threat.
Kapanen.
Right?
I think they had Mikheyev on there. It was a gong show.
It was a gong show. Where I think with Joe Thornton, it really settles down that second power play. You can put Spezza, you can put Mikheyev, you can put Hyman. It does give the Leafs a lot more flexibility on that second power play. And I like the Barabanov signing. I like the Mikko Lehtonen signing. I think that those two guys, we're going to look back and say that those were pretty big steals. I know a lot of teams were scouting them. A lot of teams wanted them. So those are going to be those are going to be my sleeper picks to really have an impact on the roster, because they didn't come here without the Leafs promising them that they were going to make at least the opening day roster. So, I like where the Leafs are going. So I really had them ranked high amongst all the Canadian teams at number 1.
Yeah. I think that overall, like it's very hard to argue. Like, just to bring it back to the Button thing, like it's pretty like ludicrous that and him having Toronto at 5 kind of tells the story of where he's coming from. Is that when everyone from an analytics perspective, everyone with an eye test perspective, everyone who follows the game of hockey, no one's ranking the Leafs like below 3 in their Canadian rankings, and he has him. It's 5th, right? Like I'm pretty sure he had him 5th,
5th or 4th or 5th.
Fourth. Sorry. So he has him 4th. Like, to me, you just kind of know that it's a very clickbaity take. So yeah, overall, like, I think we just proved our point quite well, that you really can't make an argument for the Leafs to be below 3 in any sense of the matter, really.
No, and too, like, and I know, we likely touched on this before, we came on air, but like, we don't know, is there going to be an all Canadian division? Because that just really strengthens the
Now,
Leafs.
now that you mention that, yeah, that would
Right? Like that
benefit
just
the
really
Leafs
that would benefit the Leafs
significantly.
beyond. But even too, like if they go back to the traditional divisions, Boston, and we'll have our friend Mark from the Black and Gold podcast on next week. But Boston really didn't improve, and they're getting older. Tampa, yeah, they won their cup. They're going to be an obvious threat in the division, but everything else is up for grabs. Like, can the Maple Leafs now finally surpass the Boston Bruins and become number two?
Yeah, you're right.
So
Yeah, you're right, Pat. Like, to me, I think the Leafs are going to benefit from what their peers have done in any matter, really. Whether they're in a Canadian division or whether it's in the traditional Atlantic division. If we're looking at the Atlantic division, like, I still think Detroit's going to struggle. I still think Buffalo's going to struggle. I still think Ottawa's going to struggle. That's 3 teams out of the 8 right there. Florida, like, Bobrovsky's a huge X factor there. Like, you could probably argue that, like, Florida could be a top 4 team, right? You got Montreal still. Like, it's just a Canadian division would help the Leafs a lot because the Pacific teams and by Pacific I mean Vancouver, Edmonton, and Calgary and even Winnipeg for that matter, are much weaker than Tampa, Boston, and Florida for that matter, right? So you're kind of subbing 3 teams where every game you play them, it's a battle to now, like, okay, Leafs should win this game. You know what I mean?
yeah,
So it does change the perspective a lot. I think what the NHL is going to try and do is they're going to start in a Canadian division, and then they're hoping to kind of get back to normal and end in all 31 markets.
yes.
Because yeah, I just think there's too much money at stake. So, like, we're seeing the NFL do it right now. We saw baseball get through it. As many valleys that baseball did have to go through, and they definitely landed on their face towards the end of the season with that Justin Turner situation. But like, yeah, I just think that the NHL is definitely going to find a way to get this done in a normal sense, and they're going to try and get it done before the summer, before we get into the middle of summer, right? So I'm not panicking right now, because a lot smarter people are looking at this than us for sure. So hopefully, fingers crossed that we get hockey soon. I'll be looking forward to the World Juniors. I know you and Lucas as well. That's probably going to be the highest level of hockey we're going to see for the better part of 6 months at the time. So that should be some really good stuff, and there's going to be a lot of Leaf prospects there. So that's actually something to keep in mind too as we wrap up here.
Most definitely. So I guess for final thoughts, I'll throw it to Lucas first. Lucas, provide your final thoughts on these rankings and kind of what you thought on the other, on Anthony's and mine sort of rankings. And I would like to kind of get your final thoughts.
Honestly, I don't think there's anything that was left unsaid between the 3 of us. To be honest with you, I think we all hit the head right on the nail there. And to be honest with you, as Anthony said, you got to take everything, I guess you would say, with a grain of salt. No one actually knows how it's going to pan out. This is kind of based off opinion at this point. I think all 3 of us were actually relatively similar. I think we all have a very close take in who the best and who the worst would be. Greg Button, that was funny. It was a good read. It gave us something to talk about, so I appreciate that. Hopefully he has a couple more crazy takes so we have more stuff to talk about later on in the offseason. But other than that, no, Anthony's right. World Juniors coming up. Can't wait to watch that. And I got to go watch my Giants lose to the Bucks on Monday night.
Excellent. And Anthony, any final thoughts for yourself before I wrap up today's podcast?
No. Yeah, I'm just gonna be following all the other sports this week. Nothing else going on for me. I'm looking forward to the next podcast. We have some good guests coming up, so that should be fun.
Most definitely. So, Anthony kind of alluded to it, so I'll kind of throw it out there. Look out for the following podcast. We're going to have Mark from the Black and Gold Boston Bruins podcast come on and join us as we look at, how both teams now compare to one another. For many years, the Leafs are, tied to the Bruins. So it'll be interesting to kind of get Mark's take from a Bruins perspective on what he thinks of the Leafs and what he thinks of how the Bruins shaped up. And we do have 2 additional special guests who we'll share shortly on all our social media. If you haven't yet, head to manscaped.com. Use the promo code CLNNation for 20% off on all their products. And thank you all again for listening, and look forward to many more conversations.